environment. We have a terrific climate and environment for people to live in. But I think that growth has its challenges. It always has and always will. And that means that our state and local governments have to be appropriately development constructive. And that means that at local levels, as we think about zoning, as we think about entitlements, as we think about impact fees, we have to balance affordability with smart growth, and be able to accommodate the influx of people in a convenient way that maintains our lifestyle and our the things that make South Florida or Florida as a whole wonderful environment, while accommodating the many people who want to participate and be a part. We've got to try to make sure that we don't live by the rules of not in my backyard, but instead embrace the influx, but maintain the lifestyle.
Stuart, you're also an environmentalist, and there has to be a balance here. Can you talk a little about the challenges of the changing environment and how this strategy fits in?
Look, I think that it's always been a balance of recognizing that everybody needs a place to live, and so development does continue to migrate outward. Some people call it sprawl. It's just the pattern of development, and having more density has its challenges as well. So smart development and well-constructed patterns of development can be environmentally sensitive and friendly. I think it's important for both government and developers to work together to come to good solutions that not only balance the environmental concerns, but also the traffic concerns, the infrastructure concerns that need to be attendant to new development and growth. But at the same time, we can't shut down growth just because it comes with its challenges, both environmentally and infrastructure-wise. We have to find ways to put them in balance so that we can accommodate population growth and the growth that is coming to Florida.
Talk a little about how housing product types may have changed with the combination of growth, maybe COVID, as well as the changing nature of work. I mean, how are you thinking at Lennar? I know that you've got lots of innovative thinkers there. How are you thinking about housing product types? What happens inside the house and outside?
Well, look, there are shifts that have taken place. They were actually activated before the pandemic, but the pandemic has accelerated some of the trends that were already taking place. Flexible office hours is something that had been considered long before the pandemic, certainly has been accelerated by the pandemic. Flexible office hours means more people living at home and working at home and exercising at home. Maybe even schooling at home for their children. And so this means that another bedroom or an office in the home in terms of layout, but also connectivity in the home is critically important. One of our sponsors here is Hotwire. Hotwire is a leader in thinking about how do you get the amount of connectivity you need, but more importantly, the fiber optics in communities to be able to provide the bandwidth that everybody is thirsting for at this point. We need 1 gig in, 1 gig out in order to have proper connectivity in a Zoom call. We've got to have that happening fluidly while the children are watching TV or doing their homework and interacting on the internet. All of these trends are becoming more and more pervasive and important in the development of communities. its connectivity, and the home itself. And these are trends that are accelerating as people and as businesses figure out what's going to be permanent and sticky, and maybe what will revert back to the way it was. And that balance has yet to be struck.
So you don't think that any of these questions are settled yet in terms of what the work environment's going to look like, what housing is going to look like in the future? So how do you position a great company like Lennar for all of that?
Well, listen, I think first of all, the first part of your question is, I do not think that these questions are settled. I think they are settling, and I think that there will be more evolution as we go forward. For a company like ours, we stay very close to our customers. We look at how our customers are actually using the homes that they buy, where the stress points are, and where the opportunities for innovation might lie. And we try to stay very responsive in designs of the next community and the next home styles in order to accommodate a broad range of where the world might migrate to. It's imperfect, but it is evolutionary, and we try to stay at the forefront of evolution. I do want to say one last thing on that, Donna, and that is, you've noticed, those who follow our company have noticed that we spend an awful lot of time and a great deal of investment capital in investing in technology companies and technology solutions. So we're not only staying close to our customers, but we're also staying very close and investing in entrepreneurs and companies that are paving the way forward so that we can stay close to the drumbeat of where the world is going.
Talk a little about those companies that and how it's changed your ideas about housing and what kind of investments you have to make.
So the range of our investments is everything from the way that we acquire customers and do our marketing, all the way through to the way that we build homes. So we've invested in a variety of companies that have affected the mortgage business, the title insurance business, the home insurance business, and the way that customers interact with those participants. It used to be that getting a mortgage was one of the most cumbersome processes known to mankind. Today, that process is becoming far more fluid because of the technology companies that are changing the path to home ownership and the path to acquiring a mortgage. So on the one hand, they're reinventing the way of mortgage engagement. On the other hand, they're reinventing the way that we interact with our customers. So those technology companies are reverse informing us as to the way that we're going to interact with our customers. Let me go just quickly to the way that homes are built. We are invested in a company called Icon that is 3D printing homes. It's hard to imagine that we can have a printer actually printing homes. But I will tell you, Donna, that by the beginning of next year, we will probably be under production with our first 100 3D printed homes. And so stay tuned. There are a lot of changes coming, and they are changing the way that homes are built, bought, and engaged, and it'll help us stay at the forefront of where the market is going.
Let me ask a question about 3D printing. How does zoning and building codes affect all of that? And do we have to change building codes for 3D printed homes?
Yeah, so this is clearly a dance. Anytime you have innovation in housing, it requires the very close cooperation of builder, innovator, and local government, because building codes most certainly have to adapt to new forms of production. And what that means is there's an investigation process to look at the safety and soundness of the product that is being advanced, and to look at the way that the building codes can protect the future of those living in those structures, to make sure that it is safe, and consumer friendly. So at the end of the day, right now, those are exactly the exercises that we're going through in markets where we will be building. Now, a 3D printed home is being printed out of, I don't want to say conventional concrete, but it is actually a lavacrete that is a very durable substance and will produce a very safe home. And we think an even more safe home than the ones that we're producing right now. But putting that aside, there is that dance between innovation and government oversight and acceptability. And the regulatory environment will be called on to accommodate or to consider new technologies as they come into production.
Can you do that with American supplies? How does the international supply chain issues that you're so impacted by affect 3D printing homes?
Well, 3D printing homes is primarily local aggregates that that will be sourced here in the U.S. Probably more accessible than some of the supply chain issues that we see that might come from overseas. But look, the supply chain is disrupted right now in so many different ways that that it's not just a derivative of import export, or I should say import issues. It's disrupted for raw material issues, which might be produced here in the US that might have been disrupted by storms in Louisiana and Texas. It's disrupted by labor issues that might be exacerbated by the pandemic and people being out of work for days or weeks because of exposure to COVID. There have been a number of disruptions in our supply chain, and not and most of them, frankly, are not internationally related.
Let's talk a little about the labor supply issues. And I know you've worked on some of these with young people. What can we do about the labor supply issues in construction?
So, the labor supply issues, have a number of sources. Some of them relate to the pandemic, as I just described. Some of them are more structural. We do have a labor shortage in the United States right now, and this goes across industries. And our industry, of course, is one of the participants in that shortage. But you have to go back to like 2006, 7, 8, 9, where the home building industry just crashed. It just contracted so quickly. And so much of our labor force was forced to seek employment elsewhere and to develop skills in other parts of the market. And as the market has come back and home building has rebuilt itself, that labor force has migrated to other places and is situated in those places and is not coming back en masse. So we've had to actually reach out to new participants, to a younger generation, to provide vocational training in and around some of our community colleges and activate a resource development program of building job skills in a broad range of participants that in order to bring labor back to the housing market and to be able to build and produce the homes that the country's asking for right now. Remember that over the past years, there has been a severe production deficit, and we're now building up the capacity of an industry that's being called on to take care of excess demand and limited supply and get it rebalanced.
Wow. Where has the labor market migrated to? Is it these big Amazon warehouses that are paying pretty well? Can you tell?
Well, it's really across the industry, and just remember, it was a forced migration at a complicated time. The housing market contracted, as I said, very, very quickly. Labor had to find a way to get employed. There was a very high level of unemployment for a long period of time, but the housing market was very, very slow to come back. It was disabled by the mortgage market that first caused the downturn and later was regulatorily shut down for an extended period of time. So the labor came back to where labor could find a job, and it just wasn't in housing for a long time. So it got distributed across many industries. If you remember, it was probably in first order, it probably went to the oil and gas complex, but later it has certainly come to some technology places like Amazon or other types of businesses like that, the distribution machine.
What are we to make of the alleged trends to smaller communities? That is, people figure that they can work remotely, so they're going back to either old cities or smaller communities to work from because they can afford the housing there, I assume.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question in our industry right now. Again, many of these trends have not defined themselves as permanent, so we're going to have to wait and see. But there's a clear movement into some of the what I might call secondary cities or secondary markets. The large scale cities, there's been an outmigration or an appetite for people to find either more convenient places to live or less tax burdened places to live. And that has inured to the benefit of some of the secondary cities and locations where taxes are lower or lifestyle is perceived as more compatible with what people are looking for. And even secondary and tertiary markets that might not have been considered significant home building markets are becoming far more significant right now. Now, again, for a home builder, you got to caution yourself, and I caution home builders that are looking that a strong move into these markets can be kind of fool's gold, very temporary in nature, and it could reverse. So we're working gingerly, but nonetheless focusing on some of those secondary and tertiary markets.
I think I told you the story of my cousins who are computer specialists. They work for Google in Seattle. They just moved back to Cleveland. They sold their very tiny house for $1 million. And in the Cleveland market, they purchased a huge home. The difference was dramatic. And Google said they could work from home forever, as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Even the technology world that can enable people more adeptly than other industries to work from home are going to have to consider and with experimentation figure out, can you engage people who can work from home to find a way to collaboration and mentorship that, at least historically, has happened through interpersonal collisions within an office environment. And so, I'm more of a traditionalist. I kind of feel like the personal interaction is really important, but I also, being an investor in new technologies, try to get out of my own way and imagine something different. I think these trends are going to define themselves over time. But even Google, think about the fact that Google just bought a $2 billion office building in New York City. Well, if they're really going to have this migration of people working from home, why are they buying a brand new office building in New York City? I think that they are leaving open the optionality of we might just have to go 2 steps forward and maybe 1 step backward and find our way forward.
Stuart, before we get to, I see one question on, let's go to affordability in housing, because I know you've thought about this issue and about its challenges. what do you see for the future? I mean, for so many cities, including our own city of Miami, affordability is a huge issue.
Yeah. So this is such a great question. And at the national level, we hear about national politics, but at local levels, affordability is, is probably the most significant topic that local authorities have to think about, because it's all about workforce housing. Where do our teachers and firefighters and police officers live? And the more the inner core, or the housing in and around the inner core and even spreading out become more and more expensive, it becomes unaffordable for that group. It's all going to come down to local politics and land entitlement. A number of people conjecture that there's plenty of land. If you look at, land in and around the inner core that could be redeveloped. If you look at the entitlement process and the cost that goes into getting those properties approved, entitled, and ready to build, you find that affordability evaporates very quickly because of math. Land and time to entitle, impact fees, all bring up the cost of land, and then the building process and the sticks and bricks, the actual building products, all become very expensive by the time you get to the end of the process. It's not affordable anymore. So land entitlement, sometimes at the outer fringes, are probably your only answer. The work between developers and community officials in getting entitlements and available land for development is going to be where affordability is found as we move forward. Now, just layer on top of that, it's possible that technology will be a part of the solution, but land is going to be at the heart of it.
What kind of, it seems to me that we may need a generation of leaders in the business that are more flexible and tied into not only their customers, but also the changing technology. So what are the characteristics you think of leaders in the field in the future? And what characteristics do you look at for when you're putting your top management team together?
Look, I think in every industry today, given the fact that the rate of change is accelerating, and I'm not saying change is accelerating, that's for sure, but the rate of change is accelerating. I think the most important thing for every leader is going to be flexibility and adaptability, willingness to think differently about how what we've done as a conventionalist today must evolve in our ability to adapt to and engage the future. Things are going to be very different for the home builder and for people across industries if you're not adaptable and you're not thinking ahead and looking around corners. You're going to be left behind, and that's a core value here at Lennar. Yes, most of the people at Lennar have been working here for sometimes decades, but if they can't be flexible in the way they think about where the world's going, they're just not going to make it for the long term here.
Great. Let me go to a couple of questions. This is, I wouldn't know the answer to this one. As culture continues to evolve and things like the social media amplify small voices, do you think that the public perception of developers needs to change in the near future? In the 70s and 80s, developers were literally movie villains.
So I will say, listen, I've grown up in this industry for my entire life. And as a developer, I feel like we always wear the suit of a villain. And I just say it's not fair. Yes, I think that there has to be an evolution in the way that the developer is perceived, because we are the growth engine for the growth of our communities. And we also are the ones that are going to solve the affordability problem, if anybody is. Um, so we have to be viewed as a constructive partner with our community officials and our community at large in order to get to the solutions that our communities need. So yes, I think that social media and other elements can be a participant in that, but we got to join hands and figure out solutions to these problems.
Great. Let me go through a couple of these questions pretty fast. This is an interesting. What is the height you can build in the 3D printed system? Is it limited to 1 or 2 story structures?
Right. So let's first understand that we are at the very, very beginning stages of even a notion of 3D printing. And only the very first homes are being completed right now, have just been completed in a 3D printed style. And so today it's only a single story home that is actually 3D printed. Now, there are 2-story homes, but the second story is built in a conventional style. But I always try to remind myself, and I encourage people to remind themselves, that everything that we see today, whatever you can imagine in the future, is possibly going to evolve that way. So it can be in the future 2-story, 3-story, 10-story homes that are 3D printed, but the technology is going to have to evolve. Just parenthetically, I will say that the most complicated part of 3D printing is not so much the hardware to actually print. It's actually the composition of the concrete or the lavacrete that is the ink of the 3D printer that has to adapt through the climate cycles through a day, starting with, cooler in the morning and hotter in the afternoon, and getting the curation period to be just right. It's all about chemistry. So these are complications that will work themselves out over time. And I think the sky's the limit.
What will be the cost of a 3D house compared to a regular build house? And will this technology reduce the number of jobs?
Okay, first question is cost. And with everything in technology, we always have to remember that a starting point lacks scale. It's a starting point. So the costs today cannot be estimated, because today's cost, when brought to a scaled program of more and more volume, you start to bring costs down, and they come down quickly. And with scale comes innovation. So the expectation is that over time, the cost structure of a 3D printed home should come down and be quite attractive. I can't prove that right now. Nobody can. We'll see. As it relates to labor, one of the big attractions to a 3D printed program is the fact that it does require less labor. And in a labor constrained market as we're in right now, it's getting to a solution of being able to produce at a price, but being able to produce with the available labor supply is a critical focus for the industry right now. And it's one of the attractions of 3D printing.
Here's an interesting question. Is there a market for single family homes that incorporate office space and have extra parking space for customers?